So in this video, we're going to look at how to use loops with lists. We're going to do two things. First, we're going to look at how to get the sum of all the numbers in a list. And then we're going to see how to, so we're seeing how to like get everything from a list and use that information, store it somewhere. And then we're going to see how to add 3 to all the numbers in a list. And that's like taking a full list and changing everything in that list by the same amount. So first thing we're going to need is, because we're doing a loop, we really want to make a counter. I'm going to set this counter equal to 0 to start. And then let's jump right into it. We'll start with a while loop, and we'll move to a for loop after we kind of understand how it's going with a while loop. So I'm going to say while the counter is less than my list, length of my list. And so now the counter starts at 0, and as long as the counter is smaller than the length of my list, I'm going to be looping here. So let's start doing it. I want to get the sum of all the numbers on my list. So actually, I'm going to start by saying a new variable, sum equals none to start. Whoops, I can't use sum because that's blue, so I'm going to say sum list, and now I can use that, right? If they're ever a special color, see how that's blue, or none is purple, that means it's a reserved word. I need it to be black to be able to make my own variable version of it. So I'm going to make a sum list. None. Actually, I'm probably going to start it out at 0. And now what I'm going to say is sum list equals itself plus my list at counter. Now, there's quite a bit going on there. Let me just finish up this loop, and we'll look into this line. Next, I'm going to say counter equals counter plus 1. This loop should get the sum of the entire list. And now I'll print out the sum of the numbers in the list are, and then I'll print out sum list. And while I'm in the loop, let's just let's put some variables in here just to kind of check on it. So I'm going to print out the sum list at the end of the loop. I'm also going to print out the counter at the end of the loop, just so we can see what's going on. Let's run it. So by the way, we have 7, 13, 24, 72, 86, and 99. Let's just do that sum super quick. So it's going to be 7 plus 13 plus 24 plus 72. Oh, running out. Let's see. There we go. Plus 86 plus 99. It should be 301. So we're looking for 301. Let's run it and see if it works out. Looking good, right? We ended up with 301. There is an error when I run this. The name sum list is not defined. Issue is lowercase l. I made it with an uppercase L so I could see the difference between sum and list. That's not that big of a problem. Sorry about that. Let's run it again. Good. The sum of the numbers in the list are 301. I'm going to do one last thing, which is it's looking kind of confusing over here, which is which. So I'm just going to say counter plus, and I got to cast it to a string. Okay. And you know what? I might as well do this too. Sum plus cast it to a string. Now we see a little bit better. Okay. Let's run through this step by step just to make sure that we're understanding exactly what's going on. So, because there's quite a lot going on here, especially lines 7 and 8, right? That's kind of the majority of it. So, I start out with my list up here, counters at 0. While counter is less than the length of my list. Well, the length of my list is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a length of 6. Counter is 0, so I will go into this loop. Move on to line 7. I want the sum of the list to equal to itself plus my list at counter. Okay, so I haven't added 1 to counter yet, right? SumList is currently 0. I set it equal to 0 plus my list at 0. Well, my list at counter, which is currently 0 right now, is 7. So SumList is now holding on to 7. And then counter is equal to itself plus 1, so counter becomes 1. Which is why my first bit of output over here is that the sum is 7, because my list at 0 is 7, and the counter is 1, because we only added 1 to it here on line 8. That's where I print, then I printed lines 9 and 10. That's where these two first come in. And now I'll jump back to line number 6. Counter is currently the value of 1. 1 is definitely less than the length of my list, which is still 6. So I'm going to run into the loop again. SumList equals itself plus my list. Now don't forget, and maybe I'll write a little comment here, SumList right now is 7, because that's what I see over here in the top right, because before I had set it equal to 7 by saying 0 plus 7 is 7. My list at counter, well, counter is now 1, we can see from over here. So I'm going to go to my list at 1, which is 13. So now I'm going to do 7 plus 13, and that's going to end up being 20. So SumList is now going to be holding on to 20, right? So that's why it says the sum, when I print the next time on line 10, the sum is 20. I added 1 more to counter since counter was 1 before. It's now up to 2. Let's run through this one more time together. So counter is currently 2, sum is currently 20. Do it again. Counter is 2. 2 is still less than the length of my list, which is 6. So then I'm going to go to SumList equals itself plus my list at counter. Don't forget, counter is currently 2. So now it's going to be, all right, well, SumList got switched over to 20. I'm going to do my list at index 2, because counter is currently 2. So 0, 1, 2. Now it's going to be plus 24, which is why after I do the sum on line 10, it prints out 44. And it just keeps going, right? The nice thing about programming is once you figure out your logic and you can give it the commands and it can loop nicely, it will just do all of it for you. It added all of them up. It got to 301. So here's one really nice way of moving through a list. And this is a thing that, like, as you want to move through lists, you're going to use this exact same pattern. You make a counter. Maybe you have a sum. You have some sort of variable holding on to whatever you're trying to do with the information in the list. As you move through, the most important parts are right over here. My list at counter. Counter equals itself plus 1. And you're doing that as long as your counter is smaller than the length of your list. And this is a way to move through a list using a while loop to do something to it, right? Now here we got the sum, so that was one example of doing it. Let's now look at wanting to add 3 to all of the numbers on my list using a while loop. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete all this stuff. Actually, I'll just delete I'll delete all this stuff. Bada boom. In this case, I want to add 3 to all of the numbers on my list. I'm not summing them, right? So I can actually get rid of this. Let's go ahead and write our while loop. So while, and again, it's going to be the same thing almost every time. Counter is less than the length of my list, right? While the counter is less than the length of my list, I know eventually here I'm going to end up doing counter equals counter plus 1, because this is how I move through my loop to make sure that it ends eventually, right? Eventually, as I keep adding 1 to counter, it'll become higher than the length of my list. It'll stop the loop. And for here, I want to add 3 to all of the numbers on my list. Well, all I really need to do then is my list at counter is equal to itself, so my list at counter, and I'm just going to add 3. So let's print out my list just so that you can see that, before the loop, the list is 7, 13, 24, 72, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, I'm going to print out my list one more time. And let's run through this, and then we'll maybe add some more print statements inside the while just so you can see each step. So I'm going to run it. My list started at 7, 13, 24, 72, 86, 99. And then I added 3 to each one, 10, 16, 27, 75, 89, 102. And all right, let's, do we need to print? I don't know. I think maybe you can just follow along. While the counter is less than the length of my list, I'm starting with the counter at 0. So I'm going to say my list at 0 is equal to itself. My list is 0. So it's going to be equal to 7 plus 3. So now my list at 0 goes from 7. I add 3 more to it. It goes from 7 to 10. Then I say counter is equal to itself plus 1. So counter used to be 0. Now it's going to be 1. And I reloop again. 1 is still less than the 6 over here, which was the length of the list. And now I'm going to do my list at 1, which is 13, is equal to my list at 1, still 13 again, plus 3. So now my list at 1 got switched from 13 to 16. And so using the same exact pattern, right? First time around, we did the sum. Second time around, we're changing everything in the list. But the pattern is, as long as the counter is less than the length of my list, I'm adding plus 1 to the counter, and then I'm doing my list at counter. I'm doing something on the line before to either edit the list or do something else. But this will just keep looping until I get to the end of my list, and I've added 3 to everything. Now, you just got to make sure that you're careful with this, right? Some common errors that we have when we're looping through lists, and something to check for in case you have some sort of error with your program, is our indexes start at 0, so you really want to be starting your counter at 0. It's really, really easy to make a mistake at the very ends of your list, so make sure you're starting at 0, make sure that your list starts there. If you get some sort of error, maybe instead of less than, you want to do a less than or equals to, depends on how you're going. Sometimes you might change your counter by more than 1, so just pay attention if you end up doing something like that, like you want to skip every other one, you want to count by 2s. And so you just gotta, pay attention to this if there's an error, pay attention to your counter if there's an error, pay attention to what you started your counter as if you have some issue there. But that was our first little glimpse at loops with lists. I think this is a long enough video already. I'll do a for loop one in a separate video. So yeah,